Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. So the final item here is something that I thought was really interesting and not widely reported. So Airbnb had their best quarter, most profitable, biggest quote unquote, and most profitable quarter to date, although there's some weak guidance for Q4. And what they said on the earnings call, which was, I read the transcript, I didn't listen to the call, which was interesting, is that, and I'll quote this, this is the CFO saying that their focus has been on the overall brand and to be less reliant on search engine marketing. And then he said that, or this may be Brian Chesky, the CEO, said that 90% of the company's traffic is direct or organic. And that one of their biggest traffic drivers is PR. And he said that they think about performance marketing as a way to laser in and balance supply and demand rather than acquire customers. So I thought that was really interesting because it's enabled them to really reduce their ad spending quite significantly. And it's a strategy that I have long thought is the one that every business should pursue, which is to build a brand so that the consumer is searching directly for you, coming directly to your site, rather than trying to compete in a category search with a lot of different companies, both in terms of ads and then also on the organic side. And so one of the questions that arises, I mean, Kevin Indig, I think, talked in a post recently about just how competitive everything is and how hard it is to get organic traffic, et cetera, and PR. Nobody's paying attention to PR. Do you think that Airbnb is an exception in this case? They've got a pretty well established, and they do a lot of TV and connected TV. They've got an established brand, and so that makes brand marketing much easier for them. Or do you think that this is really a strategy that any business, regardless of size, should pursue, and so as to kind of get out from under the need to do any PPC?
So let me tell you an anecdote that just came in yesterday from Aaron Wyke at Leadferno. By the way, I am an investor in Leadferno and a big supporter, so everything I say about them you should take with a grain of salt. But that being said, he was on Matt McGee's podcast, real estate podcast, the other day. And as a result of that, they had a massive bump in new signups and inquiries and interest. And Aaron is a great brand builder. He did the same thing at Gather Up when he joined Gather Up, was to do number of things, speaking, being on podcasts, great content. So even a small starting business like Leadferno or a business that hit escape velocity like Gather Up, neither one of those spent one penny on AdWords and spent every penny on inbound through content, education, webinars, and podcasts. And it can be successful. And when you get good content, it doesn't matter how competitive it is. I mean, if it's original content with original ideas, with original research, it's going to show up because it answers questions that haven't been answered.
Because it's good.
Because it's good. That's right. And that's what happened. And it's what's happening at Leadferno. It's what happened to Gather Up. And so, but it requires, original content. So it takes somebody like Aaron, or in the case Gather Up, me and Aaron and Don, to write that content that was unique and to have a data source that's unique. If you're looking for the same old, it's a problem. Now, Airbnb has done a great job of producing content, both in very, unusual niches. So they do have great organic presence and they have a great brand name. I mean, if I were them, I wouldn't spend one penny on AdWords. I mean,
they're spending a lot of money clearly on marketing, right? They're doing TV, they're doing out of home. But the focus is the top of the funnel is the point. It's not customer acquisition at the bottom of the funnel, places to stay in Paris, France, although they presumably will show up for some of those queries. But they're really focused on getting people to come directly to them as a kind of primary source.
I think the interview you did with Craig Mount's another example of a small business building a brand without spending a penny on AdWords. They did it through TikTok, which, as you pointed out, is difficult. but they had a unique sort of approach to putting themselves in front of people and generated a lot of buzz, a lot of interest, and didn't spend a penny on AdWords. So it is
Well,
possible.
so content is really interesting. Is a really interesting discussion that we don't have time for in depth. I mean, I basically ran content at Uberall for a time, and it's very, there was a lot of discussion. I mean, I probably shouldn't talk too much about this, but there was a lot of discussion about building the brand, building the brand, building the brand. But there was a lot of internal pressure to generate leads, and I think at a lot of companies, the sort of short-term pressure to get leads, to create assets that can be downloaded, to do certain kinds of things which aren't inherently incompatible with brand building, but in practice are, that's kind of problematic. The way that a lot of companies think about their content,
Right.
there's a lot of selling that goes on in content. I look at a lot of white papers, I look at a lot of research reports, and 50% of the report is some survey that Forrester or Gartner have done, and then the back half of the report is some thinly veiled sales pitch or something like that. So you guys at Gather Up did a great job on content because of who you are and your attitude toward content creation and your attitude toward your audience and your respect for your audience. And most people are not able to duplicate that because of the culture that they're in or because of their particular approach to content creation.
Right.
And content is just everywhere. I mean, the market is so noisy. I mean, I've seen already dozens of holiday shopping survey based reports, and Black Friday stuff is coming up, and so on and so forth. And there's just a lot of Me Too stuff that's going on. And you had some original data. I mean, it really helps when you've got a resource like the tool that you built to Gather Up. But I think it's easier said than done, but it's doable. I think it's the right strategy, but it is a long-term strategy that has to be balanced against whatever the short-term objectives of the
Yes.
entity are.
And very shortly after we got bought, that pressure that you mentioned became very real, that there should be a call to action in every article to convert, which, like you point out, is, in my mind, very disrespectful and not helpful. But that's the way, sales drives, right? And
well, most, I mean, we're in an environment now where people are really, I mean, we've all been paying attention to all the layoffs, especially with, the Facebook 11,000 or more that happened essentially yesterday. Um, and the pressure now is very great. I mean, as you're sort of alluding to with the Gather Up example, there's a lot of pressure for people to hit short-term goals or short-term objectives. And marketing, people talk about how marketing and sales are coordinating more these days than in the past. But marketing is seen as a way to drive leads for sales to close. And that often poisons, I think, this idea of brand building. And it's a very challenging thing for people to do this. TikTok is a great resource. There are others that are not directional marketing that people can use to build a brand. But it's not a simple thing. But I do think it is the right strategy over the long term because you generate inbound, and that's what you want to do in a really, really noisy, crazy market.
Yeah, like you point out, it requires singular focus on the end user and the customer.
And I mean, it's in a way. I mean, you may have identified the key point when you talked about respecting the customer. In a way, it's really about how do you view your customers? Do you view them as people who have problems that you're trying to help solve, or do you objectify them and see them as units or leads or impersonal sources of revenue? And I think that kind of attitude toward your customers permeates the whole kind of approach to content creation and marketing. And so this is not something that people talk about, but when you really respect your customer and you really understand them, I mean, people use the overused word empathy, then I think a lot of things can flow from that ultimately benefit the company. But I don't think that we have that attitude in many companies these days, notwithstanding the rhetoric.
Well said.
All right. On that note, on that eloquent note, we come to the end of another Near Memo. Tell your friends, subscribe, and look for Mike's article coming up in the next couple of days on that the CID suggested edits bug that zaps your reviews. That'll be helpful. And there's another one coming after that.
Actually, the article will be out before the podcast is out, so they should look for it.
Depending on how quickly I edit it.
Yeah, pressure's on.
Yeah. All right. Then, and I'll put a call to action at the end of it. So, and I've given you a call to action. Subscribe. Tell your friends. Here we go. Okay. All right. Anyway, have a great weekend, week, whatever time of day or year it is for you, and we will see you next week. And David will be back.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.